to safer places.
And with homelessness comes the threat of disease. The International Red Cross fears that the longer this goes on, the higher the chance of disease spreading.
The most urgent needs that we are talking about are linked to health. The need for medicines is also linked to hygiene, which is also linked to the need for shelter.
Most of the fighting, which some fear could spread to civil war, has been in the Ouattara stronghold of Ababo. The sound of constant gunfire and fighting is now a distant memory for the ones that have made it here. For these men and women of God, helping the few that they can is all they can do.
We tell them they can always use this area for their children. We can't abandon them. That's why we come here, so we can protect them and their children.
The refugees here escaped with only what they could carry, and they've got no idea when they can go back or what they will go back to. Imran Khan, Al Jazeera.
9 people have been killed in a suicide attack on a police station in northwestern Pakistan. Officials say a lorry carrying explosives rammed into the building in Hangu district. 30 others were wounded. A judge in Lahore has ruled that a CIA contractor accused of killing 2 Pakistanis will not enjoy diplomatic immunity. Raymond Davis maintains he acted in self-defense. The case has strained relations between the U.S. and Pakistan and inflamed anti-American sentiment there. Al Jazeera's Kamal Haider has been following the case.
Indeed, it would be considered a major setback for the Americans, but this is a trial court and the case has still a long way to go. The matter can come up at the High Court. The High Court could grant that immunity, which the Americans have been saying that Raymond Davis has had all along. The court is being held in Court Lakhpat jail. The Americans are taking very keen interest in this. In fact, their consulate general in the city of Lahore was also in court today. She's been following this very closely. So for the Americans, this would be a disappointing day. But for the Pakistanis, who've also said all along that the matter is now before the courts, and only the courts have the jurisdiction to decide the fate of Raymond Davis. Davis was said to have been, on the day of the incident, Davis is said to have been riding in a private car. It was not registered in the name of the embassy, at which point he says somebody tried to rob him. The Pakistanis, of course, saying that the circumstances were very different, that the people never pulled out the gun. That, of course, is the police reports. But there were a lot of witnesses. This happened in a very busy area of Lahore, and therefore the public outcry became a real problem for the government, because on the one hand it was the relationship with the United States, on the other hand it was the backlash from the public. So the Raymond Davis case has, of course, received a lot of attention, a media hype, but it's very difficult for the government to maneuver when it comes to this complicated issue.
German police say the man arrested after 2 U.S. servicemen were shot dead at Frankfurt Airport was born in Germany, but his family is from Kosovo. The servicemen were shot dead as their military coach arrived at the airport. 2 other Air Force personnel were injured. Kosovo's Interior Minister said the suspect had been identified as Arif Uka. Nick Spicer has more.
I'm standing outside of Terminal 2 at Frankfurt Airport, one of the biggest and busiest in the world, and this is where people are picked up and dropped off. Some 10 to 15 American servicemen transiting from the United Kingdom were being picked up on a bus right here when there was an altercation involving a 21-year-old man, a German citizen originally from Kosovo. Shots were fired. He killed the driver of the bus, a serviceman aboard the bus. Both were members of the military police, we understand. 2 other people were injured. He then ran inside the terminal, where he was wrestled to the ground by an uninjured serviceman and a German police officer. German authorities won't speculate as to motive, even though American authorities are suggesting there may be some kind of religious motivation. Some reports say that the man cried out, "God is great," before firing. The German Chancellor Angela Merkel has said she was deeply saddened by what took place and that everything would be done to find out what was behind it.
All right, let's remind you now of our main story here on this Al Jazeera News Hour. There's been more political upheaval in Egypt. The Prime Minister, General Ahmed Shafiq, has resigned. His replacement is Essam Sharaf, who's expected to form a new government in Cairo. Joining me now here in the studio is Thomas Gorgisian, an Egyptian writer and political analyst. Let me get your reaction first to this nomination in Egypt. Do you think it will go far enough to appease the people who've been asking for more change?
Instead of saying nomination, I would say resignation, because resignation is more important in this issue, because it was clear for the last few weeks after 11th of February, which when President stepped down, that the demands of the people, especially in Tahrir Square and other places, was to to resign or stay away from the power for Dr. Shafi or Ahmed Shafi. And as a matter of fact, this news is good news, especially it's coming on Thursday, as we said. It's always related to Friday, as we said.
Because there are more protests planned tomorrow.
More protests, and the main focus was tomorrow was going to be this, like cleansing or purification of the system of the remnants that it was left over after the revolution. Because as the people on the Tahrir Square were saying in the last few days, that the way that people clean the Tahrir Square, they have to clean the whatever is left over after the Mubarak.
So the resignation is important, but the nomination is also important, because Essam Sharaf is one of the names that the pro-democracy activists were pushing forward as a possible replacement, and he actually, in fact, also took to the streets demanding a change in Egypt.
Yes, part of it was that, and part of it people were ready to get rid of. This is almost the demand of the people, as they were saying on the street, is what anybody but Shafiq. First. Second, of course, if it was like one of the choices, it would be much better. Third, of course, in the last 2 or 3 days, there was some very prominent Egyptian personalities that they met the military council, higher or supreme council, and in that discussion they came out, including Baradei and Amr Musa and others, and then they came out of it that there is a need to change, because as we know, Shafiq came 29th of January, and from that time he was appointed, as a matter of fact, by President Mubarak until February of 11. He was almost.
It was a very short
and
stint.
not just short. He was always saying that he has to stay. We have not to hurt him, and he has his history. And this kind of expression that people didn't like it. I mean, they said, okay, we get rid of Mubarak, but still Shafi is doing the same job, although he looks different. But as a matter of fact, there was a need to change. And the main demands in this from this new government or the new cabinet, well, we don't know when it's going to be formed, mainly is to fill the vacuum, the security vacuum which is in the streets. I mean, till last night there was a big discussion with the Dr. Shafi, Ahmed Shafi, and the prominent writer Ala Aswani on TV. It was stayed till 2 a.m. this morning in Cairo, and it was really, everybody was tweeting after that, is it going to be over or not? Because simply the vacuum of the streets, of security, and the need to the presence of police forces there, it's a must.
So that's the priority of, you say, this new cabinet, which hasn't been named yet. We are expecting that to happen soon. Now, you mentioned Shafiq, and you mentioned the new prime minister as well. This certainly is a big victory for the pro-democracy activists who've been demanding change in Egypt. What do you make of the moves of the military council so far, every step that they've taken since Mubarak has stood down?
I mean, more or less, they are trying to fulfill, it seems so, that they are trying to fulfill or meet the demands of the people, but it's